Victor and Patricia, because I wish I knew Spanish, but I look Spanish. But I know a few words, Quito. And I always like to call him amigo. Very happy to be here. So through these the days I'm here, over 4 lectures, what I'd like to bring you is some very critical global challenges around not just food, and but also how they're connected. Fundamentally, food is not an, or agriculture is not an isolated issue. And when we think of in isolation, then we will not address the major global problems of energy and environmental challenges, health particularly health challenges. So they are all connected. And so as we look at agriculture, we need to think of it in this connected systems way. So as I lay out these problems and challenges, I will continuously emphasize the systems approach to solving the problem, and mainly because we live in a system on this planet. So if we consider the control points of the system, then we can address each of those challenges better. And we have better hypotheses to solve these problems. So in that context, I have a very nice opportunity in North Dakota, which is in the Great Plains. And one of the advantages of Great Plains is even though we have one growing season, we have 16 hours of light during that growing season, and very beautiful black soil and good water resources. So that whole Great Plains region is agriculturally very rich, and we grow many diverse crops. So that's a very important point. So as modern food systems and agriculture systems develop, we narrowed our food choices. And so we need to go back to diversity, because ecological foundation of the planet is based on diversity. So diversity of agriculture gives a lot of advantages. So the Great Plains, we grow more than 40 crops and commercially. And so this is a very good foundation for global food security and health that I will address. So as we build these partnerships, one of the goals of my institution in North Dakota State is to build partnerships, and part of that is our annual conference, to which Patricia and Victor have come 4 times. But we also host many other similar strategic workshops and conferences that I will highlight. So today what I'd like to do and continue this theme is how these issues of food security is closely linked to us facing the climate change, and how do we build resilient systems. Okay? Not just robust, but resilience. Resilience means you can compromise some yield, but the plants have to survive and be productive. So you can't have productivity and then suddenly a stress comes and the plant dies, right? Or animals. So resilience is their ability to survive hardships. And so that's very important as we look at food security. And how do we then look at this? So I will, my talk will be in 3 to 4 phases. One, I'll give you the conceptual grounding and relevance of these challenges. And then I will take you through some examples that we use using systems logic, how to build these systems. And those system logic principles are not exclusive, there are other logic too within that logic. And so different people have used different systems control points. So we have used a few. And so here you'll see an example of how a systems-based approach can help to solve these multitude of problems. And I will look at food production, processing, resilience, and health. These are the principles that I'll be talking as I go along. So one of the goals of our institute is not just build the new approaches and science, but also build partnerships. So we have 12 to 15 partnerships. So as you see our publications, it's with Udayana University in Bali, and then Thailand, and hopefully with Costa Rica, Mexico, all Chile, Peru with Lena, and so many partnerships. So these partnerships become very important because it brings a different ecological perspective to the same questions. Because we are still a single planet, but we have different ecology on which to build these ideas. And therefore, here are some concepts that we are working with around the world. Some of it is very agriculture, but others are some new ways of thinking. Right? So, and I'll touch upon this not maybe today, but over the course. Food for Health Diversity Program, because as we see diabetes challenge and chronic disease challenge in the world that is even growing more rapidly, that I will highlight a little later, we will see that we need a diversity of food to have these antidotes for the disease. But also diversity is very good for ecological resilience, right? And so Food for Health Diversity Program is an important program. We collaborate around the world. And that also encourages everybody to build their own local systems for more resilience and more value addition. So that's and we also look at, very important, if we have diversity, we have better choices for the climate resilient solutions. So that's a very important point that we collaborate on. And then for young people like you cannot now think only Central America or Costa Rica or in the region. You have to think globally. Not only problems are global, but you'll be participating in a global system. And therefore, your strategic thinking has to have global studies as a logic and frame that. And that helps you to build confidence, build your research better, advance better. You have better relationships as you build these ideas, better opportunity to strengthen your own academic careers and also other aspect of your overall growth. And therefore global issues are another thing that we sort of participate on. And then we have some workshops on creativity training and innovation, because what's happening now is globally we have built a lot of framework from the Western model, especially last 400 years, which has its relevance. But there's a lot of Darwinian logic in that. So in Darwinian logic, what is it? It's, we procreate, we find resources to maintain that procreation, and then we have social interaction to maintain both, right? So survival of the fittest. So in that, we lose empathy and many others. There may be concepts of empathy within some species, within survival, but we lose larger empathy. And so as we move towards a more larger global issues, we'll have to think more empathetically. What if we use too much resources? What happens to our children? How do we preserve all parts of our society? When someone who's disabled is our responsibility when they come onto this earth. So we need to go beyond Darwinism and look at more empathy, kindness, compassion in strategic thinking. So this thinking is also very important, because as we look at the layers of the brain and function, as we quieten the active Darwinian modes of survival, you can see that they could be higher modes. Your intuitive thinking comes from that. So intuition is a very important part of creativity. So how do you build intuition in the creative process? Because we are living in a knowledge economy. So as we live in a knowledge economy, you need creative thinking process where you need to think beyond Darwinism and survival to a more empathetic world. So in that empathetic world, there is many components of creativity. So to be creative, and build your intuition, how do we go? How does the brain work? What are some training you need to do that? How do you think about it? But I may not be touching all of that, but that's a very important seminar that we give around the world on creativity training, and how does it help young people like you to be prepared for the innovation economy and knowledge economy that we live today. And within that, we extend that into research. How do you do your research? What's the research design? But more importantly, how, as you build your research, you also think of strategically about your publications. And how do you build that? What are the principles? What are the guidelines? What are the ethical guidelines? So if you do it that way on an ongoing basis, then you're more successful in your thinking. You're more successful in finishing your degrees much more efficiently. But more importantly, you're better prepared to be leaders rather than just following and finishing a project. So if I will have some time in one of the lectures to touch upon some of that. So these are some issues we discuss. And so if you come to the larger challenges of the planet, since suddenly in 2000 we have a very important shift. So today we are about 7.3 billion people on the planet. We are projected to be about 9 billion by 2050. And due to African demographics, we'll be about 11, 12, saturate around 11, 12 by end of the century, 2100. So when we, but what has happened since 2000 is for the first time, we have a disease shift. We are moving away from infectious diseases and malnourishment related disease affecting the global population towards a more high calorie based global disease, starting from diabetes and its consequences. So the first time on the planet, excess calorie, or calories that we need, but when it's too high, it causes many biological malfunctions within that. And therefore, food health and wellness issues are now more burdened with a lot of empty calories than the undernourishment. They're still there in a population that's 7.3 billion. We still have 1 billion people on the planet, around about 850 million, who still need macronutrients, micronutrients, these basic nutrition. But we have more than 1.5 billion who are having a lot of calories, soluble carbohydrate largely, and then lipids as another important component. So in the global narrow choice of foods, we have a burden of calories, and so as a result, more of us are going to die from non-communicable chronic disease than infectious disease. So this is a big burden, and it's a shift in global health challenge, which is directly impacted from the environment and also our food production system. So that's a very important point to remember as you do your different projects, is that environment and health are all underpinned by the foundations of how we produce our food and how much we eat. For example, in the US, we have availability of 4,000 calories per day. Not only is the calorie model not perfect, but also, of course, not everybody eats 4,000 calories, but 4,000 calories is a lot of calories, double what we have been recommended. Just wanting you to take some buy some. Yeah. Yeah. And therefore, within that, we have rapid change in information technology and life sciences. Well, life science is the key science on which we need to work, but the efficiency of life sciences will be dictated by information technology. And I will touch upon that in the slide, like integrating things, how simple your work has become, how you can tie different things, the fact that I'm presenting right here. So all these are important technologies that interface with every aspect of our human advancement. And very importantly, the environmental consequences are linked, not only how we produce food, for example, as carbon dioxide has improved in the last 200 years, so through the Haber-Bosch process, we have doubled the nitrogen on the planet. So as a result, we grow a narrow choice of food, and rice, wheat, few choices, and then we use carbon to make nitrogen and make a lot of carbohydrates. Right? And that has direct impact. So from the fossil fuels, we have this doubling of the nitrogen and very high abundance of carbohydrate. And no wonder we have the most rapidly growing situation of global type 2 diabetes in the world today. So most of the world is burdened with this disease. It's about currently around 400 million people. Okay. So the way you can see that environment and how we produce, and also we use a lot of that irrigation water to make more of these carbohydrates that makes us sick. Okay. So it's a connected system, connected at one point, but then it sort of feeds on the other. And therefore, if you look at these connections, that's where the control point logic comes. And therefore, you see environmental consequences of sustainability are underpinned and linked. And also it's linked to the energy challenge, because what are we doing today? 60% of our energy basket is from petroleum and coal. Coal is reducing, but we still use petroleum, including to make nitrogen fertilizer. And so we use the fossil fuel that's warming the planet to make double the nitrogen, excess nitrogen waste, and making a lot of carbohydrates to make us sick, right? So one feeds into the other. So energy is the issue in the environmental contamination and also the overall system. So if you grow more legumes, we need less nitrogen. It fixes the nitrogen, 79% that's in the atmosphere. So we need to rethink how we grow our food. So if we rethink about the energy, this energy link, and grow more legumes, it's better for the energy and environmental consequence, but also good for human health. Because in many parts of the world, like Honduras, where beans has been an essential part of the diet, the bean to cereal ratios have gone, like in India, 1 to 10, when it should be 1 to 3. No wonder India, Mexico are the fastest growing diabetes countries in the world, because their basic dietary framework has widened to a higher carbohydrates. So now if you grow more legumes, you need less energy, but more healthy food. So ecologically we are balancing. So if we look at this control point logic, you can see we are living in a system. And so water issues, so what is water? So carbon being hydrated. So this photo energy that's coming from the sun, carbon dioxide is captured through carbon being hydrated, carbohydrate, right? So that fundamental process requires this liquid. So again, it's connected. So we have 3% of freshwater resources, but luckily desalinization technology is rapidly improving around the world. And so that can help us because we have abundant water. But still, we need to better preserve the water, and how also it does not get affected by some of the environmental consequences of our different actions. And therefore, as we look at the water issues, energy issues, environmental issues, technological interface, and then the food health and wellness issues, you see they're all connected into a system, and there are control points that connects this. So if you identify the control point of that system that allows these emergent properties to come, then you can have better solutions. So what is a system? A system is based on many components, which is held together by different control points. And so the resilience and the robustness of the control point as the emergent properties, if you understand those control points, then you know when the system collapses or can be held together. Okay? Like the light bulb, it has all these filaments and the bulbs, and then it's held together. And then there's the electric. So you have the whole system and you know how it's held. Each of the components are important, but it's only held together by these different components and through the control point of the electrical system being conducted through this different system. Same in a plane or in overall system. So in the emergent systems approach, more important than the components are the control points of the component that allow these emergent properties. Okay? So what controls the overall system? So that's a very important point. The emergent properties, they cannot be broken down. Because if they're broken down, they come apart. So by knowing the control point, you know how the system is held. Okay? So this control point of the overall system is very important for problem solving. Okay? So that's the most important lesson here, is we are living in a system, and the system is held together, the components of the system are together by some control point. By identifying the control point, you can have better hypothesis and better solution to the emergent properties, so that the emergent properties of the system is more in equilibrium and does not collapse. It's very important. So if you think of this logic, then your scientific logic becomes better. So we normally have used reductionist approach. Okay, we just work with pitaya and don't worry about other things. Okay, some nutritional effects. But pitaya growing has many impacts: health impacts, ecological impacts. Maybe in some parts it's better to grow only pitaya and not other crops. Okay. So if you know these connectivities and system control points, then you have better rationale for pitaya growing. Or how maybe to grow it in a more wild rather than ecological production system. So when should you do that? These are important questions that we will be asking. And therefore, system logic helps us to better frame the questions and better frame the hypothesis, and therefore have better solutions for your need. Okay. So this is a very important larger question as we face these many different challenges. If you look at a systems approach, then you can look at the overall system much efficiently to shape your own question, whether it's agronomic or ecological or any other field, does not matter. You need to know these different components. Okay. So with that kind of systems approach, if you look at our food challenge, we are now 7 billion, 9 billion by end of the century, but 12 billion. But today, we have enough calories for 12 billion people, even though we have 7.3. So naturally, what's happening? The fastest growing disease in the world is type 2 diabetes and its consequences. So we still have 1 billion people on the planet that are hungry. We need to address that. Little parts of Central America, parts of Sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia. But this is the bigger burden now. Too many narrow choice of soluble carbohydrate based calories from drinks, and if you go to the aisle, it's different drinks, different starch. Even today in the breakfast, we had a more dominance of starch and sugar in our diet. Okay, so that burden is leading to the high rates of preventable non-communicable disease. These are preventable because we have moved into this sedentary life with narrow choice of calories, and therefore we have sufficient calories that needs to be redistributed. So as the problem of the population grows up to about 12 billion, we have enough calories. So now have we adjust and readjust that so that we can still feed all our people with micronutrients, but also have these extra specialty components where the macronutrient balance is more dense in fiber and other bioactive components, and not so easily available to our digestive process and burden our diabetic pancreatic system very quickly, which I'll come to a little later. But is the excess calorie, soluble calorie burden that is the biggest challenge. And then we have to address both these problems with increasing climate. So last 17 years were the hottest on the recorded ever. Since we know how to record the climate, it's the hottest 17 years. 2016 was the hottest. This year is a little less than 2016 so far. Right? And so far we've had 17 of the hottest in the last 20. It's in the recorded history. So climate is changing, and therefore we need to face that in terms of the carbon and see how do we decentralize and manage this. But more importantly, how do you make plant stress improvement? That means not just yield, but how do you shift that yield to a more resilient system? Okay, not a high carbon system, but a more resilient system. And also within that, how do you diversify our food sources from a narrow choice that we have only for macronutrients and micronutrients, but even more wider, and especially fruits and vegetables. But interestingly, the fruits and vegetables, a lot of it is highly perishable. So post-harvest management of these fruits and vegetables is very important because they give the antidote for this. In addition to the wide variety of grains like legumes and other grains, you also need a lot of fruits and vegetables and other components of the diversity to counter this big preventable non-communicable disease. So these are 4 big areas we think are important. So that's the focus of the institute in North Dakota, is how do we still provide micronutrients, the basic nutrients for our population around the world, especially maternal health, child health, elderly population, the critical phases of growth of human beings. And then we have now burden even in poor countries that are this old existing problem have new burdens. That means they are growing more faster toward diabetes. So we think all macronutrient is good, and we are saying, oh, that's food security. And then we give a lot of this excess carbon burden to the poor population. So the poor people who just are getting enough macronutrients are fastest to go to diabetes. So if you see around the world, like in America, it's the indigenous communities, the urban poor communities. It's not just race, it's African American, Hispanic American, the white American, the Appalachian. So every poverty is a burden. The minute you have enough macronutrients, you have the quickest burden to diabetes. That's a global problem now. Even in Mexico, the poorest suffer the most. Chile, India. India is now very terrible in the urban poor slum. The rapid rate of diabetes is tremendously difficult problem. And liver, and it's complicated because you have alcoholic interface to liver, fatty liver, and also carbohydrate interface to fatty liver. So it's not just diabetes, it goes to liver health, it goes to cardiac obstructive pulmonary disease and heart disease. So 4 biggest killers on this planet is type 2 diabetes, going to heart disease, and then COPD, cardiac obstructive pulmonary disease. It's also complicated by bad air. And number 4, fatty liver. So these complicate what's called the preventable non-communicable disease. They're directly linked to diet. They're directly linked to how we grow our food. So if we understand these interlinks, then we can take this current surplus and rethink our agriculture a little more to addressing all of these problems. So here in Costa Rica, you have amazing opportunity. Look at the crops they are working on. So those are the crops you need to work on while we maintain the current bean balance and the cereal balance, all the basic micronutrient balance. You need to widen the other choices that are so good for this ecology, because they bring all these preventable components for health. Right? So that kind of thinking and logic you need to build, because we don't need so much food. But if we use our ecology better and build our local resilience better, then we can have a more balanced and healthy diet that's ecologically viable, using less resources, growing more sustainably and ecologically. Okay? So we fill all the control points from the same framework. So that control point logic is the basis of our big challenges in food security. So with this kind of approach, we are in a post-genome integrated biology. Genome era was brilliant because once DNA was discovered, we knew that is the information. But DNA only responds to the environment. And it talks to the transcripts, proteomics, metabolomics, and they work in a system. So genome is one component of the system, and in some cases it may be a control point. But the control points are not only at the genome, because the genome is plastic, responding and changing. You have the epigenetics coming along. And therefore, once you have the information overload of the system, finding the control points that hold this different information of the system is the system logic. So we are in an era of system biology, right? It said, as Sidney Brenner rightly said, if we do not define the problem, we will not know what information is important. Which of this information is important? And using control point logic, that's the system biology. So system is held together by this cellular system, prokaryotic, our journey from prokaryotes to eukaryotes. But what's a control point? Is it some transcription regulator? Is it some metabolic control point? So if you identify that control point, then we know which system is important. And therefore, in metabolic diseases, in diet-linked diseases, metabolic syndrome, especially type 2 diabetes, we are asking the question, what is the breakdown in that disease? And in our logic, oxygen breakdown is very important. That means we consume our food, but it's what we breathe and how the mitochondria burns. And it's different for each of us. That's a control point. So oxygen function linked to mitochondria is control point. So if our diet can maintain that mitochondria very well, then we can manage this very better, right? Of course, there are other control points of endocrinology and many other areas. But if you start finding these control points, then our nutritional solution is better. Our nutrition is not just macronutrients and micronutrients and say how much we need in a 2,000 calorie diet. But where is the imbalance coming from? So in that imbalance, what is this control point? So if you can catch that control point, then you ask the right question, right hypothesis, your path to solution is more efficient. I'm not saying you will solve the problem, but you're more likely to solve the problem, right? So asking the systems logic control point beyond the components of the cellular system is a very important part of life sciences. So you as young people who are getting into science, doesn't matter whether agronomy, soil science, forestry, doesn't matter. If you know the overall system and the control point, your forestry question will be better, your soil health question will be better, your food science question will be better. So this systems biology logic is a key strategy for problem solving. So you're asking the right question, and therefore the right concept and rationale is built, and your thesis is better, your publications are better, you frame your questions better, so your outputs are better. Huh? And in the end, you're more confident that you know a basic approach from which there's a lot of things emerging. Okay? So conceptually, you're grounded. So being conceptually grounded is a very important journey you need to make as scientists. Okay? And systems biology helps you with that. So we are in an era of systems biology where we need all of these disciplines, but there's some basic principles that control the system. So understanding those basic components are important. And this is not rocket science. That's how our ecology was built 3.5 billion years ago, right? So as life came on this planet from ancestral prokaryote that were in the anaerobic world to a more complicated and prokaryotic world, and then ultimately 650 million years ago, we had the first oxygen uplift, right, with the algae and later more, and then the chloroplast mitochondrial systems emerged. So these other prokaryotes presumably were engulfed, and we had a more complex emergence of mitochondria photosynthetic based life, which is a plant life, algae and plant life. And then you had the other component, the non-autotrophic life like us and lizards and others who depend on the photosynthetic life. And of course, there's a geochemistry happening on deep ocean that has its own, but photosynthesis is a primary driver. And you can see in our system on land and even on the ocean, this mitochondrial chloroplast base is the food system. Carbon being hydrate is the primary source of our fundamental food source, right? So if you follow that, you see how they've emerged, and so that's where the microbiome comes. We are still more prokaryotic than eukaryotes. Even though we have become eukaryotes by engulfing and have organized ears and brain and different, they work in synergy, but still we are dictated by also the coexistence of our ancient microbiome, the prokaryotes. So that's where this new advantage, it's not new, but we are rediscovering that this ancient microbiome is still a part of us, coexisting with our eukaryotic system. So this is very important. So as we emerged and worked in different ecology, we are seeing from soil health to human health, the prokaryote life follows us. So we are more prokaryote than eukaryote if we have to live in good equilibrium in our system on this planet. If we have to use our basic components, carbon dioxide, water, nitrogen, and then the oxygen, right? So if you have to use these four components efficiently, we need our ancient bacteria. So that is a very important question that I'll come back to repeatedly. So there are two important things that we're missing in our food. One is the role of oxygen, second is the role of microbiome. And so we have refined our food that does not support both these very critical elements. We refine our food, the fiber is not there to feed our good bacteria. We pull out all the good antioxidant, does not counter the bad side of oxygen malfunction, right? We feed narrow choice of macronutrients. So no wonder systems breaking down. And therefore, if we understand this cellular logic, common metabolic control points, how they hold the system, and know food is a combinatorial system, that the food that was developed in an ecology to build all these protections. So if we capture those protections, we are better off. The more diversity of those protections, we have many risk protection, right? Not one protection, but many protection. So you have 78 servings of fruits and vegetables a day of different kinds. So you bring more protection. ecosystem, for an example, right? So diversity gives you many choices for protection, and that makes logical sense because we are products of our ecology. And so if we live with an ecological mind and put that into our economic system, we will be better. So the economics has to have an ecological foundation, and that's very clear. So nothing wrong with our, I mean, we have to refine our economic system to be good for everybody, but it's fine to have economic system, but the economic system has to be resilient. And resilience has to be built with logical framework from soil ecology to human ecology. So this logic, our nature has already told us. So why do we only eat super refined bread? Yeah? Why do we eat only few choices? Nature still eats more combinations so that your oxygen is using it better and then your microbes are also happy. Right? So this logic, don't forget, we are a product of our ecology. So if you follow this ecology, then your science becomes better. You answer your question better. So therefore, these critical control points, we are seeing that microbe is a very central, whether you're a soil biologist or whether you're working with plants or animals, you're making chickens or birds or whatever you like. You have to keep them happy with their microbiome. Human microbiome. There's so many studies now. Human microbiome on cancer, human microbiome on diabetes, human microbiome on different diseases. But in the end, it's a totality of our wellness. Therefore, how does the microbiome work with us? So across the ecosystem, it's clear now, even in zoo animals, the microbiome in the wild is very different from this narrow choice of diet they feed in the zoo. The microbiome shifts. So disease burdens are different. So they've done that in some zoo animals as well. So our ecosystem is very central, and therefore that needs to be brought into our economic framework. Okay? Because humans have become an economic animal, right? And so we dictate our choices with economic. But if we don't put ecology, we may be extinct very soon. The sixth Anthropocene extinction is quite soon upon us. If we don't see how we came to here, and if you don't think about us, so the sixth extinction that's projected, the globe is warming, and systems breaking, and warming. And some of us may survive, but we are burdened with that survival strategy. So the extinction issue. So we need to look at the systems innovation, and therefore it's very important that the role of oxygen function and for other protective ingredient that supports a good bacteria is very important, because we are products of our ecology. So our genes adapt. So for example, Japanese, when they're in Japan, they have less prostate cancer and breast cancer. The minute they come to Hawaii, North America, the breast cancer rates sort of equalize with the rest of the population. So this evolutionary pressure on the plastic genome methylation or any other epigenetic effects is both negative and positive. Negative means we can go towards disease. Positive means with good diet we can reverse it. So that flexibility is there. So this plastic nature of the genome and its ability to adapt. So we are in ecology plays a very central role, the adaptive ecology. So if you look at our food today, we are stripping them of all these good components that protect the oxygen malfunction and also the microbiome. So we have to feed our microbiome and also allow our oxygen, our breathing. So as the glucose and nutrients go, the oxygen also goes with it, right? Hemoglobin. So they have to go hand in hand. So that's really where the burning happens, not in a calorie meter, that we have optimized our nutrition. So real burning happens with the oxygen going with the blood to different cells. So that oxygen carrying capacity ultimately is in the mitochondria, and the effects at the last step, okay, when water is formed. So as this Krebs cycle gets turned on, you have NADH, FADH being formed, that is shunted into the mitochondria, and there's proton motive force, and electron being transferred from substrate. And then as it goes through these different layers of the electron transport, you get protons being captured in ATP, right? So that proton movement is dictated by the sugar, but it's the oxygen that couples it in the last step, water forming step of the mitochondria. So when that breaks, you have oxidative pressure. So depending on which cells of your body that breaks, you have these free radicals emerging. So if you don't counter that, then you have a lot of damage coming. It will be liver first, it will be digestive system to liver to cognitive, every cell in your body can be affected. And therefore this flaw of trying to support oxygen function with components in the diet is very important. And also we are seeing that the microbiome is an important part of that. It works. So it takes this complex food, breaks it, it feeds itself and runs many biotransformations so that this nutrient that we transfer that finally sent into the vascular system with the oxygen is more efficient as it gets distributed to your system. Okay. So a diet has to integrate those elements. So just calorimeter burning and making 2000 calories is not good enough. We have to find a new model. How efficient is the food that we now put together support the mitochondrial function and the gut function, microbiome function. So unless we bring this into food production and health, then the system will break down. So see how with system logic we can bring a different nutrigenomic metabolomic approach, yeah, based on control points. So what is the control point here? Number one, oxygen is a very important control point. Number two, microbiome is important. So what is missing in supporting those two are stripped down food. You're not eating all these high fiber good foods. So the minute you eat whole food and a diverse array of choices for those foods, then those two things can be corrected. That's also very good for ecology, growing more diverse food that supports this. Right? So if you go down, so this current model, if you go to the grocery store, it's all sugar, starch, some meat cuts, protein, right? Some fruits and vegetables, and yogurt, now new probiotics. Ideas are coming in. But if you take a more deeper systems approach, we can change all those aisles more to better. So nothing wrong with the food system. It's good we have abundant food throughout the year. So we should not blame the technology. Technology is only good with what food we produce. Now if you produce it with a good nutritional foundation, the same technology can be used very well, but we diversify our grocery chain, right? Our food choices. So now we have new technology will now start, how do you now keep the whole grain better if you thermally process it? This time it may be different as opposed to something else. So new technologies will follow as well. So the systems approach is very important. And with such systems approach where you have a host response with better nutrition as a foundation, then we have all the way from seed to soil to human health. So such a system integration is very necessary. Right from your seed planting, we need to think about the human health. How does it grow? How do we process it? How will it happen when you post-process it? Because they all have to live in the same oxygen environment. The same environment we live in. So if we can nurture them with the same logic right through the system, then we'll be better. So we need this vision. We need a more integrated systems approach. We need the control points. And in our case, we're not saying this is the only control point, but it's an important control point. The microbiome control point, oxygen control point, through the whole foods is a very important element we have to bring back to food and food diversity. So it makes sense? So if you do that, then all the technology can follow that. Okay? So we have been very good with our technology and high pressure processing. Every technology is great, but how do we put it into a metabolic framework? So with this, the absence of role of oxygen, redox balancing food, we just need the systems approach. So how does the environment interface? Only then the signals can be better and the normal cell growth can be maintained. Okay, so genes are all important, but they're a product of our environment. So when the metabolic interface is robust and resilient, then the genes will be nice. Right? They do their job. They don't break down. So controlling this breakdown is an equilibrium concept. So how do we maintain the equilibrium? This metabolic interface is very important because that's where the oxygen and food. So we are a product of our environmental interface to our metabolism. So with this kind of approach and understanding the role of mitochondria, and second, how does mitochondria balance some of its energy to get the energy from the Krebs cycle, but also it has to partition to another very important pathway called pentose phosphate pathway, which produces the anabolic counterbalance. So when the cell has to protect itself with antioxidant pressures, make new compounds, make purines, make all sorts of new compounds to protect your cell, it needs the use of the pentose phosphate pathway. So as you get energy, the Krebs cycle needs to give up some of its energy function to allow your pentose phosphate pathway to work. So when these two are working together, then any imbalance coming from the redox or mitochondrial breakdown can be countered. So most of the time, drugs just counter any breakdown in the structure function, say COX-2 or P53. So those are all individual component breakdowns. But before that, there's a more fundamental breakdown, starting from redox biology to different pathways. And one of the pathways that's very important for this continuous counterbalancing as we consume good diet is the pentose phosphate pathway, which partitions between the balancing the Krebs cycle to give enough energy for the mitochondria to get its oxygen-based energy, but also counter the imbalance coming from oxygen breakdown. If you have super high calories and the mitochondria is on overload, you need to balance. So that's why when we eat food, have good fiber, antioxidants, so they may not be even if they're not biologically available and you cannot monitor, but if they can run just reactions to turn on the basic protective pathways like pentose phosphate pathway, then it's done its job. We need not sit there. Right? It can not even enter the cell. It can run just the proton hyperacidification and dehydrogenase coupling. So the minute you have protons moving, your pentose phosphate pathway has to couple those protons into dehydrogenase cycling. So that cycling can then couple the oxidative phosphorylation at the mitochondria and the cytosolic pentose phosphate pathway. Okay? So it's all proton moving from energy in the energy production cycle as well as the dehydrogenase coupling. So many compounds from pitaya or other many fruits and vegetables, they can be all different in different ecologies but do the same function. And what is the same function? They all have to move protons in our system. So what is our body? Our body is actually an electrical system, right? Running protons to get electrical conductivity and running signals. So it's a metabolic interface with an electrical system. So that, if we can couple that well with the carbon base that is driving it, then the proton movements can be efficient. It can be efficient to get ATP and not break down. It can be efficient by taking the protons that are in the cytosol and coupling to dehydrogenase, because the first committed step of pentose phosphate pathways, glucose 6-phosphate dehydrogenase. It's a dehydrogenase coupling. And then it makes NADPH. So you need NADPH for all anabolic countermeasures, antioxidant response, new synthesis, making purines. Anything new in your body requires NADPH and FADH2. So where do they come from? Pentose phosphate pathway. So this partitioning is better with a much more wholesome diet, and so that's one of the areas. So it's not just the oxygen function, the mitochondria, but how the pentose phosphate pathway is managed. So this needs to be taken into account because eukaryotes have this basic foundation from which they have minor variations depending on species. But this is the ground rules, right? So if you work with our control point ground rules, then we can go and look at the variations. Or is there a different genetic mutation there or in somebody else, right? And then we can see, but the basic logic is the same. So with this kind of logic, the oxygen function and all calories are not equal. Fructose is metabolized very differently. It's not the same as a calorimeter. is very different from glucose. Glucose is can be taken by all cells in a body. Fructose has to be converted then moved as glucose, right? And then any excess goes to fat. So which carbohydrate goes more quickly to fat? So not all carbon is the same. There is this inexpensive calorie model, has big burdens, and therefore this phytochemicals to counter it is very important. And so that's the core investigation here, is how to protect the mitochondria and allow the pentose phosphate pathway to function. It's very important. So that's a very important foundation and control point for human nutrition, not just macronutrient and micronutrient. So this system's logic, if you see, we are living in a high calorie refined sugar. If you go to the grocery store, it's the same. And the top disease in the society today is diabetes, cardiovascular disease, cancer. These are all later then. One leads to the other. They're all oxidation malfunction diseases. They are all oxidation malfunction diseases. And it was not transmitted? Okay. Okay, so if you look at that clue from plants have developed countermeasures at both reproductive phase and stress adaptation phase. Plants are sessile, they have to deal with it. And so both their reproductive and at their stress response, they've developed many countermeasures to balance that redox function. So if we can take those logic into our food system, then we are better. So using that kind of logic and balancing the oxidative stress, so this is very much relevant both for our climate resilient system. So if we make our plants and food system more resilient on the same, we'll be also more resilient because the logic is the same. So what's good for climate resilience is good for human health. Okay, so this redox balance logic is very important both in how plants, because these plants have to balance this outer shell of oxygen, right? It has to get 2 electrons to balance to 8. Yeah, and to make covalent bonds or others. So the minute 1 comes out or 2 comes out, then it's imbalance. So that's all the free radicals that emerge. And depending on how they're linked to different compounds, you have different forms of these free radicals. So balancing those free radicals and how especially the mitochondria generates that imbalance, because that's where the water is from, oxygen going to water. So that's where this imbalance is worsened. You have 9 or 7, right? So that covalent bond balancing of the oxygen, the water forming step of the mitochondria is important. So plants have developed countermeasures, and if you start following these countermeasures under stress, adaptation and reproductive function. So reproduction is the survival mechanism, Darwinian. So in this Darwin, how do you survive? And stress adaptation comes in. So this redox balance is very important. So as we look at that, we have taken this central role and seeing how this can be applied to make our plants more biotically and abiotically stress resilient. So full diversity of concepts, and same feeds into the antioxidant response and into our human health platform as well. So this dual function over many years in plant, what we have found is that there is a very interesting way of proline coupled pentose phosphate pathway driving it, where we can still get the Krebs cycle to work, but partitioning part of the Krebs cycle towards making proline, you can drive the pentose phosphate pathway at the same time. So this proline couples system can help to make phenolics and also build the countermeasures to any malfunction. So we've been following this proline couple step as a way to get these high phenolic systems from sprouts to feed-grown plants. So that's one of the important control points. And there are variations of that. We are not saying that's the only big control point, but it's an important control point in the many species we have worked with. And so using that, we are optimizing a lot of the phenolic systems in many ways. And so this particular gate where we allow the TCA to function with the proline coupling and not totally depend on TCA to make the NADH, but also have proline to replace NADH as a function and still allow the NADPH sugar phosphate to form. So this then allows nitrogen assimilation to be efficient. Antioxidant, all the other anabolic steps are more efficient. So this gate is one of the control points. And so using that, we have applied it in many different ways. Screening plants, for example, in herbs, you have 100 seeds, all are different. But we're using the proline coupled high antioxidant lines, you can pick single seed phenotypes from diverse and then multiply them if you want. Okay, so it helps you in breeding strategies, picking better lines where breeding or in itself. Or like in stress effectors as the seeds germinate, because the oxygen pressure is very high. So they produce counterpoints, right, against the oxidative pressure. And therefore, many compounds that come during that state are very important. So sprout is a very important phase, both light dependent and non-light dependent, during which we can mobilize these pathways. Likewise, we can mobilize it in a matrix and ferment them and mobilize them better. So the microbiome interface to these food matrix is very important. So using these three broad logic, we can now modify the food and redesign the food appropriately, and then see what happens in processing. Okay. So using this logic, we have many strategies and publications. We use lactic acid bacteria to improve abiotic stress resilience. We just published a paper on that, and so we're extending this. So you just using it, we can improve salinity tolerance because it changes the metabolic interface, the lactic acid interface. It changes the metabolic interface and structure. So now that chain structure is more resilient to salinity. Okay. So the microbiome is very important because it changes the metabolic and structure from the metabolic to the structure. So that's a very important. Likewise, we are using a lot of heat stress response to make more abiotic stress response. For example, you give a mild heat shock or ozone shock, they turn on their protective pathway and withstand more difficult heat stress problems. And I'll give you some examples in that. We have looked at some lines where the proline overexpression is better and they're more cold tolerant. So the proline overexpression is better, they have high phenolic, and they are more cold tolerant. This is a paper we published, defined Sarkar. And so and likewise, we can see this UV radiation link. The proline coupled phenolic response that helps the UV radiation. So if UV radiation increases, if you have to pick these tough grasses, we can pick them a lot through these proline redox responses. So this can translate into cereal production systems too. And here's a very interesting work we have been doing. We have a ozone treatment in many cold tolerant grapes. So they're trying to grow grapes and wine in the cold regions of North America. There's some varieties which are phenolic inducible and can cold tolerant survive with this, just like the turf grass, this proline coupled phenolics. They are much more resilient much more resilient to ozone. They have much more resilience to cold stress. And they have much better opportunity for these high phenolic producing lines. Likewise, we have what's called an instantaneous heat stress. There's a machine in California, they use in California, using propane gas. They give a short hot pulse of 180 seconds of heat. And it turns on the protective pathway. So this in the grape. And then when you make the wine from the grape, the overall antioxidant function is also better, but also the anti-diabetic function of that phenolic is also higher. So now where there are other parallel studies where they're showing insect pressure is less, disease pressure, mildew pressure is less, not our, but somebody else's work. So you can see this metabolic shift impacting so many areas. So there is one control point impacting others. So now you just run a propane machine through the vineyard, give a hot pulse, and not only the grape quality is better, but you don't put chemicals or anything else. So this company, I had, maybe later I'll show you the machine. It's a big, nice machine. We are now using it for sugarcane crops in Thailand, because they have a mycoplasma problem. You can't use chemicals. In the ratoon stage, we are running this heat stress. Likewise, UV stress,
Microwave and UV stress can improve this secondary metabolism. This microwave short pulse is also important in improving seed vigor. So the point here is all these stress mechanisms have common control points around this gate, right? Control point gate. So that's the system logic helping us. So with the system logic, we are following where stress is, and then it shapes into different projects, and then we answer different questions. Okay, so therefore, if you see, we can do seed and foliar elicitation strategy and improve climate resilience in plants. Now, you can follow the logic, right? Very sound principles. You can shift the metabolism and partition the carbon for them to be more resilient. And so now, this is very important. So this kind of improvement for resilience, and they're healthy. You see the wine? It's got more healthy components. So it's resilient and healthy. Right? So we are already showing you some examples. I'm sure this logic will take on. Likewise, we see components from nature like the marine sources where the protein, for example, marine sources, when you take the fish muscle of some high protein, like in Iceland, there's a species that capelin comes off in a season millions of tons and dies. So we harvest, it's not used for food. So we harvest the hydrolysate, and it's very high in glutamic acid, glutamine, because of the muscle hydroxyproline. So all these proline pathway elements are very rich. And so we use very low of them. So we have a patented process called GrowPro made from this hydrolysate, and we spray that. And the minute we spray, it stimulates the compound. And now it also stimulates some microbiome that are more favorable to the plant. Not only the microbiome, but you shift towards this pentose phosphate pathway through the proline couple response. Likewise, we have certain fungal elicitors, which normally as the fungi comes, they cause the disease. But if you just take the component that stimulates the plant and get that component from shrimp or from crab shell, for example, chitosan oligosaccharide, it's the fungal cell wall that triggers the host response. But you can get the same component from crab shell. So you can get this hydrolysate, and now you can take those components, spray only the chitosan oligosaccharide, not the fungi. And the plant thinks it's a fungi and puts on its protective response. Right? So it's very biological because we eat shrimp, the mushrooms, right? So we can use such logic, and then we are likewise stress trauma with these elicitors. We can regulate the stress modulation. So this chitosan oligosaccharide and this GrowPro, the fish hydrolysate, we can see improve all these cold tolerant responses through this coupling. Likewise, in corn, we can trigger the elicitors for many of the phenolic that we can then capture. For example, wheatgrass, they need some juice. We can trigger the secondary response and make a better juice, right? Or better, bigger plants. Oh, this is a very nice project. Just by seed treatment with chitosan oligosaccharide and GrowPro, we can improve the salinity resistance. So this is the control, and the same level of salinity is here. And the only difference is we've given it a nice seed soaking of 24 hours with a dose of chitosan oligosaccharide and a dose of this marine amino acid. And look at the resistance. So we have now repeated this in other species too. So just seed treatment alone. Likewise, we can translate into production phase as well. So in the active production phase, say 2 days before harvest, spray this. And then you trigger your protective response. It could be just like the heat response, good for even the insect control or even pathogen control. At the same time, it triggers the secondary response. This is a nice way. We have picked single seed phenotypes of oregano from a different seed line. This is very tolerant because it produces these biphenolic. And then there are others that don't, which are very susceptible to high carbohydrates. The minute you put high sugar, they die fast. But you have another line, even if you put high sugar and also reduce sugar, they live very long time because they can manage and find control their energy through these coupled responses. And one of the important compounds that helps them do that this biphenolic rosmarinic acid, very similar to the resveratrol in wine. So these compounds have, resveratrol is actually an antifungal compound. So similar compounds are there in nature for different functions. So if we can capture that, particularly in indigenous, so one of our goals is, for example, indigenous people in the North America, especially North Dakota, they die at average age of 57. They have 3 times higher diabetes. So why? Because they moved away from their traditional food system. So if you look at their traditional indigenous food, they're rich in all these redox modulating compounds. So if you analyze them for anti-diabetic function, wow, they're very rich. Same thing, my student Lena, who you know, she did her PhD, part of her PhD with me, and she looked at the indigenous Andean foods. Same logic. Those traditional foods are rich in these components. So why shouldn't we bring that back, right? So bringing back traditional food, bringing back fermentation. So we have a global initiative to bring back global traditional fermentation. So one of my favorite projects is to go to these communities, the rural villages, sometimes driving 4 miles on a 4 pickup, and look at these ancient, especially Asia, where this has been continuous. So there's a lot of secrets here in this logic. So using these traditional fermentation, I think we can make remarkable progress and bring not only a processing and diversity of food, but good bacteria, good healthy bacteria. So we're going to a blue zone, they may have some tricks there, like Okinawa. So we applied this logic and started improving our current food. So example, we are making a soy cranberry based probiotic drink, and so that's one example. So we can bring these traditional logic into modern logic, right? Modern system. So nothing wrong with that. So we applied this particularly to the pandemic, type 2 diabetes, to control glucose, beta cell function, insulin. So we can have plant components that can impact all of this. So that's the logic. And all our results have shown we can get amylase inhibitors, glucosidase inhibitors, beta cell function modulators, all in food, in a combination of food. Right? So I was, for example, 2013 diagnosed with pre-diabetes. So I said, okay, I'll take one, but I don't want to go on drugs. So they put me a low dose of blood pressure. It's not too high or low. I said, but I took and I didn't take the pills. And within 1 year now I became serious. Within 1 year I'm off medication. No cholesterol pills, no blood pressure pills. And so these are there in nature, and we can bring it consistently. So I'm very diligent. So there's a kefir, a 12-grade microbiome, low added sugar, probiotic drink. So with that I put oatmeal, a lot of blueberries, all sorts of fruits. And that's my morning. So with that, just that one glass, I can stay the whole day. And so using this combination of these things, within 6 months I was off, but my doctor wanted to see for 1 year. So this last visit he said, yeah, no problem, don't use any of my medication. So we can bring this in different ways, and we have shown it. These fermented microbiome and their logic can bring this anti-diabetic functionality. So we can bring it into our modern food systems. Okay, and we can make yogurts of different kinds with these ACE modulators. So the point here is this redox modulation and coupling can be linked. So our diet improves, so our metabolic response to it is improved. Okay? So we can redesign our food. Technology is good. Technology has to be versatile to the metabolic and ecological questions. So that's the main point. So we have some host cell models. In our lab, we have an yeast model, but also we have a worm model, this planaria. This planaria is a stem cell model. You cut the head of the planaria, head grows back. And you put some oxidative pressure, the head growing back is slowed down. Or you can take the hind leg till it grows back. It can build back any missing parts. And then you give oxidative pressure and slow it down, and then put the good compounds, and then allow normalcy to come. So during that link, we measure these redox coupling steps and see what is working, why is it working, what are these steps. And so we are trying to get these worm models as the host models to trigger. So we have another earthworm model coming up. It's more good for soil biology related. We have a earthworm, the silkworm is amazing. It eats plants and makes pure protein. So how does it do that? It eats only mulberry, very low protein, and makes a very pure protein product when it goes from larvae. Gut bacteria. Where is the nitrogen coming from? Rich. Our atmosphere is rich in nitrogen. It just has to be converted to a chemical form and then turned into amino acid to make it to this particular amino protein that's the silk thread, right? So there are many other phases of the meta, but they have to bring nitrogen to make amino acids. So nature has a lot of these different exciting things where the basic elements are being converted very elegantly. And so we have to look at those logic. So we have a lot of worm models to look at that. That gives us clues. How did this ancient prokaryotic world come to us and convert these elements in nature to be viable in different parts of nature? So if you follow that, we're very, like I just went to Iceland a month ago. So in Iceland, it's 17 million years in the making. North America is 370 million. Iceland, so there's some islands still forming. And when the islands form, the first is the lichens. And as the lichens come, they grow and suddenly have another complexity. And on them now grow thyme and a few other plants. So how do they make from a very low nutrition density to a high nutrition that grows other higher plants? So they have to capture these efficiently through microbes. Right? So they are good to study resilience. They are very nice. So how does resilience build up that? So we have similar, but from a longer period in North Dakota, because North Dakota is 370 million. So we have many parts where this wind drift comes and forms these lichens, and they have to use basic elements to make their successions well. So if we can follow successions, we can get a lot of clues. And so using that logic, we have built the Redox Valley. And I'm very open-minded to take this platform to different parts of the world and use this logic in your own research and in your own food systems. We can then put it into a local value added. This is very good for poverty alleviation. Bring value to your local economy with your local, that has local history, right? And make it valuable. So these geographical indicators are very important. And if you give meaning to them in the modern context, it's very good for every economy, right? So more strong a local economy is, better is the world economy. Right? So everyone is better off, not just the top 21% or 20%, but everybody is. And so if you can bring value addition, we can advance both local food security and global security. Without global food security is addressed only when the local food security is addressed and local resources are built up, right? So you need the science to grow, and so we are very open to taking this whole food approach and platform around the world. And so we take a field to a consumer approach, and this is very good because you can now work with the hospitals to the agronomists and the soil biologists and the forestry people. And so using this, we are now starting, that's the next good news when you'll come next time. NDSU has now going to start an agro-microbiome initiative. So we're getting 2 additional labs to build, where we're going to take microbiome, soil health to human health, and build that microbiome and build from food system to agriculture system. But we are calling it agro-microbiome because it can bring the wider collaborations around agriculture. So using some of our results we are building, and then we have a very interesting project we are proposing. In the western part there's this oil, and oil, when they do this hydro drilling, a lot of wastewater goes and has increased salinity contamination. So we are thinking, how do we have a first stage remediation and grow high value crops in such saline damaged environment? And so we can take our redox biology platform and see how we grow these biostrips with value-added high salt tolerant with high bioactives and help to recover some of these wastewater systems. Likewise, we grow a lot of corn, and how do we now go beyond just the carbon feed base into more other components, including antibiotic replacement technology. Uh, Value addition for climate restoration. So we are looking, for example, in Brazilian North or in Thailand, where the climate change is impacting. What new crops can we grow and add value to? So we have students coming from that part of the world and bringing their substrate, and we look at different technologies to add value. We have pitaya, like camu from Brazil. We have specially grown cashew nut from Thailand, grown in a very arid zone, which are very high bioactives. So my last slide. So we have the systems innovations. I just talked about a few elements here that builds our global strategic thinking, and from which we build these partnerships. And we hope through Victor and Patricia, we keep building this. And so my last slide, we need this ecological foundation to our biochemistry. So we're a product of our ecology. And you can see this from very young islands that are just forming in Iceland to ancient parts of the world. The succession of ecology shaped who we are. So if we take the biochemistry of that, we can build better food systems, better health systems, better agriculture systems, better ecology, better health and water. Oh yes, thank you. And better health. So I hope you got a framework. So I'll be taking this logic into more deeper at different phases in the few days here.
Thank you very much. And I think we have time for more questions. The international office.
Yes.
Yeah. Maybe we can take some questions if you have some.
Most important, take this into your research.
Yeah, indeed, I have one question.
Yes.
You mentioned several times that we need to diversify our diet, that we need to eat less processed foods and to increase the
I think processing is not the issue. Diversity is the issue. That means we can process even whole grain. Yeah. So I think technology is not the problem. Processing is not the problem. We are processing soluble carbohydrates.
Yeah.
So we can process whole grains.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Let me elaborate on that. That we are processing maybe the wrong way.
Yes.
Okay. And if we know all that,
Right.
why are we still processing that way? Why are we still eating in a lower?
Very good. It's human economic system. So if you look at America, it's a good example, and it's the same global. You have food companies to convert this high carbohydrate is a $1 trillion market. It has to be switched. So, for example, Pepsi Cola, I heard her once say, we have in our portfolio 20% healthy food and 80% feel good foods. So that means shifting that 20% to higher is a big burden for them. They are doing, but they cannot shift. So that's Pepsi Cola. So if you take it along, it's now maybe more than 1 trillion. So they have to shift that, and so there's a lot of mindset. When I see Massachusetts was more healthy, so in North I see a lot of unhealthy population, and you can see it's a direct effect. Go through the aisle after aisle after aisle. It's economics, and so unless you have a healthcare crisis that's deep, and then the new economies of India, China, and there's new economies that are being created, they also shift. Like India is going to shift. My wife she follows this very well. It's a rice and the bean rice gap and the bean gap has widened. So now millets are coming like, so there's millet festivals and all sorts of things happening now. Like in my mother's city, there are 4 millet festivals a year. So there's a whole, so I feel now next to the hospital, we're going to have a food store that's going to sell these. So now millet has become a very valuable crop for some farmers. And it's low water, very easy, it grows in very harsh area. So this harsh area, farmers are very thrilled now.
Yeah, because you could think that with very easy changes, you can
100%, but it's a human, how a system is controlled. But I think you're going to see in these very hard hit countries, which are still not developed, but have so many layers of the economy that are going to shift.
Yeah. Yeah, because sometimes you think, okay, we don't need to change the mind of the average population.
Right.
We can change the mind of key people.
Correct.
Yeah. For example, if you should be more or less the same for a company to process whole grains that process.
100%. I'll give you just 2 weeks ago, I had a call from Nestle. Not confidential, right? My mind is open. So they are more talking about is Nestle's new footprint on this ecology and all is good. So I said, no, it's not good. I said, compared to other companies, you're thinking more about it and you've made progress here. But in a scale of 0 to 7, you're 3. And in your thinking, you may be 5, but you're not come to that 7th path. So they are thinking. Nestle is the biggest food company. So they are thinking of diversity of products. And so you're right. I won't say only there, because yes, there are big products that they make, and you can see in urban environment they're suffering because it's cheap cola. For example, India is terrible. The government subsidizes, say, food security. They subsidize rice for 1 rupee, right, or 10 cents. They should be subsidizing beans. And the beans is 200 rupees. Who's going to buy beans now? 200-fold difference. So we told the government, no, you keep rice, let the common rice be 50 rupees, like less than $1. But make the beans 35, cheaper than the rice. Then you'll see all your poor diabetic rates will go down quickly. So we have now got some hospital to believe this. So you're right. You need many tools. It's not an easy problem because we built this over time. And you and me are not immune to this because we're surrounded by this, right? So I'm traveling, I sometimes have to eat.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
And we look forward to your talk on Monday.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.